Because in the West, we have this culture of trying to translate authenticity to the max. We have to make everything from scratch to sort of celebrate and honor the people. But the people aren't bothered about making it from scratch all the time. It feels fantastic, actually. I'm very happy about all the attention that Africana is getting, because I think it deserves it. I think, I worked very hard and I told stories from, my experience, stories of family, stories of experiences from across Africa. And I really desperately wanted these stories shared. So the best way to get these stories shared as widely as possible is not just for cooks to buy the book, but for the media, different sorts of people to champion the book, to share the book. It's more than I could have ever wished for. I'm really happy.
Well, I bet you are, but I think that it's kind of landed at a very sort of fertile period for you. The media's always looking for the next big thing, and we've been through Ukraine, we've been through Romania, we've been through Poland, and the culture of the food, and we're looking at the immigrant culture and the riches that brings to Britain. And now it's the turn of Africa. And for you, it's Pan-African, which is quite extraordinary. So it feels like the time is now. Is that what you're feeling? Is that what you're getting?
That's what I'm getting. That's what I'm feeling. But obviously, I could have never planned for this. I think the moment was just right for me because I've been on this for many years. So it's in trend, but I've been doing, this is my life. I've been doing this for quite a while. So I'm glad that it's, trending. Obviously, I feel, and I think a lot of people feel, it's become a focus, especially because of the tragedies during the Black Lives Matter movement of 2020, 2021. There's a lot more focus on the things of the culture of Black people, which, that culture, that interest has been spurred on by tragedy. But I'll take it. We're happy for the interest. It's good. It's timely. It's something that should stick. We're not a niche people, so I think you're right. It's timely. It's the ground is fertile for it, and a lot of us have been doing the work. So I think we're only reaping the benefits of the seeds that we've sown for a very long time, and well overdue, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And of course, it's a great read. I mean, there's nothing more interesting to me than food culture. I just love it. And what you've done is you've done Pan-African food culture. Africana is a celebration of the whole continent. I mean, why, for a start, did you decide to take on in your first cookbook the whole of Africa?
The audacity, right? Who does she think she is? I've had somebody make a comment on a YouTube channel about that, actually, like, how dare she, try to represent the whole of Africa?
Well, I mean, one of the answers is that you have actually travelled a lot through Africa. You don't just come from Nigeria. So explain a little bit about how you came to travel so much as a child.
My mother was just a curious cat. She's just my mother. I'm just like my mother. She's always jumping around, really sociable, traveling, and she wanted that life for us. She wasn't satisfied with, us being Nigerian, being stuck in Nigeria. She just thought this is not enough for my child. So from a very young age, she'd always talked about traveling, experiencing this and that. And she also traveled. She was always coming back from Hong Kong, South Africa. So I just thought, oh my gosh, my mother's having so much fun, learning so much. She'd bring back food from different countries. So it was a very natural progression for me to grow up into a woman that was interested in the world. People might assume that my interest is only in African cooking. I just choose to be evangelical about African cooking, but I love all food. I'm fascinated by food from across the world. But I just felt Africa needed, more recognition and more sort of championing. So my lifestyle, my upbringing as a child was really, it prepared me for this book. The experiences I had, lots of it are shared in the book as stories, things that perhaps my mother even was surprised that I'd write about, things that she would regard as regular, basic. This is not a big deal. Going to the north of Africa to find shea butter. It's like, what's so special about that? But it's special. It's an experience that a lot of people will never have, can only dream of having, Africans and non-Africans alike. So for me, I just felt like, I grew up to a point where I was living in a country where, the championing of food was always very, British, Italian. Just for me, I just got tired of it. It's the same old thing. Wonderful food. But I felt African food is so glorious. So there's this unending mystery and just joy and vibrancy that I felt was missing in the mainstream. And I just wanted to write a book that celebrated that. And I did my best.
Yeah. And it is so full of stories. And I mean, I love the fact that, you start even with your name, which means love in Soto Tswana.
Yes,
which is spoken in southern African countries like Lesotho and Botswana.
Yes.
But you come from Nigeria. So
and
even
Africa,
at birth, your mother was giving you this gift of a Pan-African kind of sensibility.
Yes. And that's what I say. I explain to people. Some people think people are not sure where I'm from because my very essence is Pan-African. My name is not even from where I'm from. So for me, I took that as a big sign that I'm doing the right thing. I have every right to. Lots of Western chefs write about food that is not of their. They're not from those areas. Nobody questions them. So.
Exactly. I mean, it is hilarious how stereotyping we are in this country about people's food. You can only write about Ukrainian food if you're from Ukraine. You can only write about Moroccan food if you're from Morocco. And yet, we celebrate the melting pot of multicultural cuisines, and yet we stick people in their little boxes. But anyway, you can, as you say, you're just going to go with this one. And you really do go all over Africa in your book. You go from Uganda to Tunisia, for example, and you go from the street markets of Lagos to the religious rituals in homes of Eritrea. Did you actually physically go to all these different places, or did you just spend a lot of time on Google?
I've been to a lot of the countries, Senegal, Ghana, Benin, and the book, I mentioned those experiences in there. And I haven't been to a lot of these countries as well. But what I've done is, even if I haven't been to a country, I've been a very curious child. I have a lot of friends from several parts of Africa. I have a lot of friends who have shared their experiences. And I also did quite a bit of research. I contacted chefs, cooks doing amazing things across the world. I spoke to an Ethiopian lady in Australia who does lots of coffee ceremonies. And, I spoke to her about family, how she enjoys and celebrates her culture in Australia. And, questions like, do you actually make injera, which is it's like a sourdough bread that's a tool to eat almost everything in Ethiopia and Eritrea. And I asked her, I said, do you make injera by yourself at home? And she says, no, I just buy it from the shop. Because in the West, we have this culture of trying to translate authenticity to the max. We have to make everything from scratch to sort of celebrate and honor the people. But the people aren't bothered about making it from scratch all the time.
Yeah.
So I spoke to people like this to learn their culture, how they celebrate their culture and the nuances, so I can share that in the stories.
Yeah, I mean, you were a journalist for a long time for a national Nigerian paper, and you go at this subject like a journalist. You're asking people, as any journalist would, rather than sort of, putting your backpack on and travelling all over Africa. You're pulling out stories from your childhood, but you're also asking curious questions. But then you do go to the street markets of Lagos, isn't it, that you particularly go to, as well as Peckham and and other markets in South London, and you're asking these questions of street hawkers and mamas. When you did it in Lagos, they did find it a bit odd, didn't they?
Yes. So Africans generally, and this is a big generalization that I've noticed across Africa, but it's something that I've noticed, and perhaps if you're selling something, you might have this suspicion. There's this suspicion from, if you're asking too many questions, you're almost suppressing the seller to sort of put on their A game to sell. Their objective is to sell, not to talk too much about why, where, when. So my questions were a little bit too intrusive, but for good reason. So I'd explain to them why. I'm like, Mama, I'm only asking this because I'm writing something for a newspaper. I'm going to put you in the paper, and more people will come and buy your pepper. And then they'd understand that I wasn't asking because I was planning on bringing on a competitive stall next to them. I was asking because I wanted people to understand why, what, where, when. Why are you selling these now? Where do they come from? What are the nuances of the produce? Where they come from? How can we detect, the best produce from where? So they understood why I was asking these questions. I also had to understand where they're coming from and what their objective is, which is to sell.
Yeah. I mean, Yemisi Arabasala, who has also been on this programme and has also interviewed you
Yes.
at your book launch at Daunt's Books, didn't
Wonderful. It was amazing.
she? And she said that when she was asking questions in the street market, she got the same kind of reception. But she said that, Nigerians don't tend to talk, well, Africans generally don't seem to obsess about food like a lot of other cultures do, and increasingly the British do as well. That's not your experience, is it?
That's not my experience, but sometimes we might be seeing things from our own eyes. Because I obsess about food, I bring it out of people. I ask questions in a very, I try to tap into people's personal experiences. So when I meet people, they may not be thinking about food, they may not be obsessed about food, but my questions tend to be about family, occasion. So if I'm in a taxi and there's a Tunisian driver, I'd ask him, oh, where are you from? I speak French as well. So I'd speak to him in French. I'd tap into his sensibilities. I'd ask, it's Christmas time. Are you going to be with family? What do you do at Christmas? What do you eat at Christmas? And then I pull out those answers. So my experience, I'd say, is based on my obsession with food. I know how to get it out of people.
and that kind of passion, I mean, it is really palpable with you. I mean, you recently did a supper club at our house, and I went to a launch at Brighton Community Kitchen, which was fantastic. And people hang on your every word. You have such a lovely sort of vivacious quality about you that it really is something that people want a part of. And they do come from all over the country, don't they, to try and tap into something. I remember talking to somebody who wanted to find her way home through meeting you and tasting some of your food.
Oh.
Now, I wonder if that's something that you come across a lot when you're meeting your followers, or whether this is something quite new for you to actually meet your followers in the flesh. This sense of there's an identity out there somewhere and they're trying to get it through you.
Yes, it's something that I notice. It's not necessarily something that I thought would happen. In the beginning, I just thought, I'm just trying to express myself, share the food of my people, and I hope you'd like it. But I didn't realize how far-reaching and how sentimental and important this would become to a vast range of people. So now, like the lady you're talking about, we have people who literally come up to me and say, oh my God, I'm so happy that you're Nigerian because I've just found out that I'm a quarter Nigerian. For me, it's a different sensation, but for her, it's truly deeply personal and important. And you also have people who know nothing about anything to do with Africa, food, geography, nothing, no relationship. And they're curious, they're excited, they want to learn. And then you have people who perhaps have mixed families or may have traveled once, or somebody who has never been to Africa, probably has no interest, but her father or his mother or relative has lived in Africa at some point. So I attract a vast variety of people, and all their stories are very, very touching. And the stories that lead back to identity and finding one's identity are the most touching, because there's nothing more special than knowing who you are. I know who I am. Perhaps that's why I'm more confident in talking about food and sharing and asking people. I know who I am. I love who I am. And I think it's something that I can't hide. People see that, they love that. And I'm just grateful that I have that blessing.
Yeah, I was talking to a black woman who came to your book launch at Brighton Community Kitchen. She was brought up from a baby by white Jewish people. Wow. And she lived they kept kosher at home. And so she felt very close to them. She'd had a wonderful childhood with them, but there was something that drew her back to her black heritage, and she was really interested in what you were doing. It was incredibly touching to watch her find her way back to herself.
Yeah, through food.
Yeah, through food. Let's go through some of your food moments, which really tell the story of you. Your first food moment is the spiced hibiscus and ginger. Yes,
the bisap. When I was quite young, maybe maybe 13, 14. I can't quite remember. I'm bad with age and years. I remember living in Benin, which is the République du Benin, so Republic of Benin. It's bordering Nigeria. But my mother was very intentional. She wanted us to speak French. She wanted us to have a multilingual lifestyle. And she thought, what's closer to Nigeria than going all the way to France? Not a French-speaking country. Yeah. And so in Benin, I think one of my most vivid memories was, seeing these women carrying big, sort of baskets or bowls of bissap. And this is a hibiscus drink. So they put it in a cellophane wrap and freeze it. So they're like lollies. And this was just the most wonderful, refreshing thing I'd ever tasted in my life. A little bit tart, also quite spicy from the ginger. So after school, would rush outside and I'd notice, everyone buying things from the women. The women knew what time the kids would finish and they'd come to the gate and would buy lots of different treats. And bissap was my favorite, refreshing, wonderful, sort of rouge purple. And that was the first time I'd tried anything with hibiscus, even though it's something that's popular in Nigeria, in the northern part. But because I lived in Lagos, I'd never really come across it. And this sort of stuck in my mind. And to date, I really love sharing and cooking with hibiscus.
Where did you go to boarding school?
So I went to boarding school in Nigeria, in Benin, and then in the UK as well. Jumping up and down, yeah.
And this was all because your mother wanted to give you a multinational education.
She wanted that. And of course, she was a single working mom running her businesses. So it did, it was good for us to be in boarding school because then, she had time and space. But at the same time, we had this flexibility of, being in boarding school, being at home, seeing her, back and forth. It was great. I thought it was wonderful. I love my childhood.
And food memories are terribly important to those kind of punctuated childhoods, aren't they? A lot of people talk about food memories, grandma cooking special foods. And your second food moment is one that takes you right back to your grandmother, braised greens and sweet peppers. But it's not just a delicious, wonderful food memory. It's really quite poignant. Tell us about this one.
Yeah, so I see the braised greens for me is, it's funny. The funny side of it is it's like Popeye food, food that gives you life. And it was food that literally gave my grandma life. She was battling with diabetes at the time, living with us in Lagos at my mum's house. And I remember being, on holiday that was the time I was in boarding school. So would come back home on holiday and my grandma was there. My mother thought it was important that we spend these last few years with her. So holiday at my mum's house with my grandma. And I remember she really loved plantains. But the thing, at that time, I learned early on from the doctors that plantains have quite a high starch content. And the doctors advised her not to eat plantains because they're too sweet, too sugary. And she protested. She's like, no, I have to eat my plantains. So they said, fine, you can have the green unripe plantains, which have less starch. And, you can have that with lots of greens. They advised her on what to eat. And I thought, oh, okay. I'd like to help, feed grandma. So my mom taught me how to make this really simple braised green dish with vegetables. My grandma liked it with some crayfish and palm oil, sometimes fresh fish or smoked fish. And it was very simple, sumptuous, wonderful. She'd eat it with boiled green plantains. And to this day, for me, it's food that gives me life. It's food that I eat almost every day. I try to have it in the fridge all the time. And I think, there's a sentimental part of it that makes me feel close to my mother and my grandma by eating this Popeye food. And it's actually a dish that has several variations across Africa. So in Yoruba land, which is in Nigeria, they call it efo, but their version is sort of with a particular kind of green, amaranth, for example, and very spicy with Scotch bonnets. In East Africa, they call it sukumawiki. They put garlic, it's stewed with garlic, sometimes peppers, tomatoes. So across Africa, you'll find a version of this simple braised greens. That's why I called it what I did in the book. So it's like a simple name that cuts across regions.
Yeah. When we were talking about people finding their way home through food, when I was reading through your book, I found this strange memory. As I was reading Kukupaka, which you cooked up at my supper club a couple of weeks back, I recognised this. I couldn't really understand it. And so I read it out to my daughter and I said, what do you think this is? And she said, this is our family curry.
This is the craziest thing ever.
And this is it's quite extraordinary. My father was in the King's African Rifles in the 1950s, and he went to Eritrea, he went to Sudan, he learnt Swahili, and he was always really fascinated by the foods wherever he went in the army.
Yes.
He was always fascinated. He was an officer, but he worked in the cookhouse so that he could get really close to the soldiers' food. The officers had different food. And he used to make this extraordinary curry that pulled upon all sorts of wonderful little flavours, including tamarind. Now, you say that you added this. So I'm fascinated at the origin of this curry that somehow connects you and me.
When I've had kuku paka in East Africa, so it's a Tanzanian dish, and a friend of mine, Mboni, who's a professor in Tanzania, we went to university together in London, actually, and remained best friends. She taught me how to make this dish, but I was taught to make the dish with limes. But, then for my book, for Africana, I recreated the dish in I changed the recipe, but kept the essence of the dish. For example, in Tanzania, they'd grill the chicken separately and add it to the sauce afterwards. But I'm such a greedy gob. I wanted maximum flavor. So I poached the chicken first in the coconut and spice broth, and then grill the chicken, and then coat the chicken again with tamarind, coconut flakes, and some seasoning, some spices, and grill it, put it back in the sauce. So, and then I finished the sauce with some tamarind, because I thought, I'd rather use tamarind for sweetness. I thought the tamarind matched the coconut better than the lime. The lime's still a wonderful alternative, which is actually what I know they use most often in Tanzania, but I changed the recipe. So it's amazing
which bizarrely my father did too. So, you poached the chicken in a coconut broth with cardamom and garam masala,
yes,
as he did, ginger as he did. But the family recipe kind of was born, I thought, in Ipoh in Malaysia, where we lived when I was very little. So he went there with the King's African Rifles. And my parents then played with that goat curry that they were having in Ipoh, but it was essentially the same coconut broth. They played with it literally all their lives, and my daughter made it just as my father was dying 10 years ago this week, actually.
Wow.
Tomorrow. And it was the last thing that he put on the edge of his tongue before he died. And he said, Lulu, that is perfect. So this is a really important curry for me and my family. And here it is being cooked up at my house by Lerato.
From an African book.
African. I mean, it just makes a lot of sense, though, because Africa was terribly important to him. So that was really important. So thank you for that. That was
it's really, now we are connected forever. And, for me, what I take away from this story is this just shows that we're more connected than we ever imagined. And this is another thing I tried to do with the book, which, believe me, it was very difficult because I kept asking myself, will this work? I'm talking about so many different countries. I hope this doesn't confuse people. I hope this guides them. I hope this inspires them. And I think it's worked. I think it's worked with Africana. People are able to pick up this book that's celebrating such a vast region. But then I do say in my intro, so nobody, doubts my intention. This is just one book by one person. There's so many of us with so many different experiences.
Yeah. It's the textures, isn't it? I'm just about to interview Irina Georgescu about Tava, her Romanian book.
Beautiful.
And she talks about the layering of different fabrics which come from different cultures, which make up Romanian food. And it feels that that's what you're doing. You give it a Christmas twist with your fourth food moment. Tell us about the Christmas pudding puff puffs.
So my Christmas pudding puff puff, one of my favorites in the book, a very natural recipe that I didn't, just like a lot of the recipes, I didn't sit down and think, let's make this. It was a very natural thing that I sort of made almost by mistake a few years ago. So we have a dish in Nigeria called puff puff. And it's a dish that you can also find. You can find it's bofrot in Ghana. You can find it in several different African countries called different things. It's a drop donut, essentially. We have donuts all over the world. But I also have Dutch family and oliebollen. We enjoy that at Christmas period. We make oliebollen on New Year's Eve. It's a New Year's Eve treat you enjoy in Amsterdam and across the Netherlands. And I hate, sorry to be so dramatic, I despise Christmas pudding. I just cannot stand it. And I'm one of those people who likes to protest a lot. If I don't like it, I don't want to be forced to eat it. Even if all the favorite chefs in the world champion it, I'm like, no, I will not budge, like Brussels sprouts. And so at every Christmas dinner, there's always leftover Christmas pudding that I have to do away with. And I thought, gosh, let me not waste this for once. And then I was making puff puff / oli bolin. And then I thought oli bolin does have spices and, raisins, dried fruit. I thought, let me just crumble this really nice, my brother-in-law had leftover a really nice vegan Christmas pudding. It smelled really good. So I crumbled it into my puff puff dough, my puff puff batter, and fried it. And it was the most amazing thing ever. Christmassy, wonderful, and just a wonderful marriage of my African culture, my Dutch family experiences, and that British, experience of pudding, of Christmas pudding. And I thought it was perfect. And I thought it had to be in Africana.
In the new year, you're starting your Ghana cooking experiences. Tell us about that.
Immersive cooking experiences. This is an extension of everything I've been doing. I've been planning this for even before the book. This is like my supper club, but supper club on wheels. Or we're traveling together. Because I've always felt I'm working so hard to bring the essence of Africa to homes of cooks across the world. I want to take you to Africa, to the source. There's nothing like being, standing under the African warmth, the sun, walking on the beach, eating the food, meeting the people. My book is never going to give you as much of an experience as being there in person. So I thought, wow, this is something that I've been dreaming of for a long time. So I thought, let's do it.
And that's so interesting. And what kind of people are signing up?
People who love travel, love food, want to experience something genuine and just want to meet people and love food. People who want to go to the motherland, for sure. People from America have been really interested. And people who love travel. And most of all, I've designed this first trip, even though we're going to stay in a luxury hotel at the beginning of the trip. We're spending most of the trip in an eco lodge, a sumptuous 100% solar powered eco lodge. I stayed there in the spring, and it's just amazing. We're in a world where we need to sort of do more to protect our planet as much as we can. We can't always, we can't abandon all our luxuries, in one go, but we can do little things. And I thought, if we're going on this holiday, how can I make it as eco-friendly as possible? I'm one of those people who I'm not a camper. You wouldn't find me camping, in the regular
I can't imagine you camping, Lerato.
So this is a really comfortable, really wonderful, ocean-facing lodge where we're going to be cooking, eating, and people can do things at their own pace. If you don't want to cook, you want to watch it, it's a holiday for food lovers, for us to enjoy, celebrate, respect Africa, and come back to tell those stories.